This Memorial Day weekend, Kyle Larson will attempt the Indianapolis 500 Coca-Cola 600 double, the first driver in a decade to do so. He's already shown a tremendous ability to adapt. He'll start 5th in the Indy 500 on Sunday. Let's bring in David Land, IndyCar expert. You've probably seen him on YouTube to talk Kyle Larson, as well as other Indy 500 favorites and storylines. I'm now joined by the one and only David Land, IndyCar reporter, content creator. David, it's been a while, man, but it's great to talk to you. Thanks for being on the show. I know you're busy this month, so I appreciate you making some time for us this week.
Oh, I'll always make time for you, Eric. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's certainly an exciting month to be both a NASCAR fan and an IndyCar fan. Anytime a driver does the double, it just raises the level of excitement and fun, and it's always great to see crossover like this in motorsport regardless, but when it's Kyle Larson, it means just that little bit more.
Yeah, don't believe me, we will get to Kyle Larson in just a few moments, but I just want to start with this, David. You're the IndyCar guy. I know how near and dear this series is to your heart. It's basically in your backyard now. You live there in the center of IndyCar Central, so to speak. So what does the month of May mean to you? We all see the spectacle, hundreds of thousands of fans. The entire city comes to life for this weekend, a holiday weekend. But what makes this weekend special to you? When did you fall in love with the month of May?
It's pretty much been my entire life, and specifically the month of May. I look at it almost like it's an extended family reunion. You see people you only see once a year. You see family members that you maybe see 3 or 4 times a year, but they all come for this race. And it's, you hear it from everybody. I'm sure you've heard it from other people too, is it's a generational thing. And when a race is 108 years old, so many of the people who go to it have been going to it as a family unit for most of that time. And that's similar with my family. I've had family members going since the 1930s, 40s, 50s.
Wow.
And we've had tickets in our family since about the mid 1980s, the same tickets in the same spot. And
Wow.
so, family members of mine who I either never met or are no longer with us, sat in those seats. And it means a lot. It means a ton. And, I know my story is not unique. That when there are 300,000 to 400,000 people there on race day, there's probably 300,000 to 400,000 stories similar to mine. That's what the Indy 500 and why it is such a meaningful race to so many people, I think.
Yeah, the size, the scale, the spectacle, but also the history there. That's super fascinating. Let's talk about this year's race in particular. I don't want to say there's a cloud hanging over it, although we will get to the weather forecast here in a few moments.
There's a literal cloud.
Yeah, but this year has been a controversial IndyCar season. You're in the center of it. You know everything that's going on between the Penske push-to-pass scandal. Lately, there's been talks of a potential charter system being implemented. I guess, does that in some ways add intrigue or interest to this year's Indy 500, or has that changed the vibe in the paddock this month?
I wouldn't say it's changed the vibe in the 500 paddock, although certainly from an optics standpoint, having all the Penske cars on the front row, there was a little bit of chirping. My phone was a little bit hot after that happened. A few different paddock folks were letting me know what they thought about that, but for the most part, I think everyone's focused on the 500 right now, but that hasn't changed what the fan base has been talking about for sure. I think that, and I know I sat in the stands for the Fast Six on qualifying day, and when the Penske cars came out, you heard a little bit of chirping. So certainly, when there is a scandal, it affects the public perception of teams and drivers that are affected by that. So that is a storyline, and it definitely is adding a little bit of juice to this 500 that maybe we wouldn't have had in the past, with just Penske being the total good guys. There's some question marks there. And then they come into the month and they're extremely fast and dominant, and there's a chance that they could dominate the race. And so there's certainly that question mark and storyline leading into it. As far as the charter agreement, my understanding is that they are going to propose their kind of final, they meaning Penske Entertainment, their kind of final idea of what they want the charter system to look like. this week to the team owners, and I suppose the team owners will either say yay or nay to it. As you know, Eric, and I'm sure your audience knows, charter agreements and charters are kind of a double-edged sword. They
Hmm.
provide some value to the teams, but they can also make the barrier to entry for racing very, very high. And so I've actually spoken to a few different team owners on and off the record, particularly the ones who might be on the outside looking in going into this charter agreement. And there's definitely mixed feelings about it. And you even get that sense. I mean, I think Michael Andretti went on with Kenny Wallace a couple of weeks ago and really, expressed some concerns there as well. So it's really hard to know. There's a lot of uncertainty, but thankfully it seems like a lot of that uncertainty we're going to have to deal with when we get to Detroit, not necessarily at the Indianapolis 500.
That's interesting. Everyone kind of blocks it out. The month of May, Indy 500 is such a big deal. That's interesting, though, because it kind of aligns with what's going on in NASCAR right now. NASCAR's obviously had a charter system for 7 or 8 years now, but it's up for renewal. And we've kind of heard the same thing, that maybe in the next few weeks or the next month, NASCAR is going to bring their final offer to the table, and teams are going to have to kind of take it or leave it. So, that's adding stress and intensity behind the scenes. And stock car racing, I can only imagine something radically different coming to IndyCar, the kind of drama that might create. You mentioned them a moment ago. Team Penske, they do look extremely strong, swept the front row in Indy 500 qualifying. Joseph Newgarden going for his second straight Indy 500 victory. Besides Penske, or you can just talk about Penske if you want, what are the teams who look the strongest that you've seen across, practice, qualifying, all over the place over the last week or two?
I feel like in the last 30 days or so, I've talked more about Penske than I ever wanted to in my entire life. So yes, you're right, Eric. They are extremely strong, and I think you've all three of those cars are the favorites, right? But if you're looking for challengers, if you're looking for someone to root for, if you don't want to cheer for the Empire and the Death Star, you might want to look to Arrow McLaren. And
Okay.
obviously, there's going to be a lot of attention on Kyle Larson, but the strongest driver out of that foursome has been Alexander Rossi. He's the only other driver to qualify over 233 miles an hour. He's right there with the Penskes. That's going to be, I think, the main challenger. Obviously, Santino Ferrucci, who was the hero last year driving for AJ Foyt Racing, I think he'll be up there. He's always aggressive. And then if you're looking for some Honda-powered cars, I would say Felix Rosenquist, Takuma Sato, and then really, I think if you're looking for the true dark horse row, it's row 5. Colton Herta, Alex Palou, and Callum Ilott, who's the fourth kind of pitch hitter coming in for Arrow McLaren this year before Teo Porcher takes over the rest of the season. I think all three of those drivers, while they didn't qualify as well as they would like, I think they could all be contenders at 500 miles.
Yeah, I've heard you mention Colton Herta this week. I know he's still young, right? Is he 23, 24?
24.
It feels like, see, I was at his first one. I haven't been to as many IndyCar races as you, but I was at COTA when they went there and saw Herta get his first win. That feels like ages ago. I forget that he's still very young, looking for his first Indy 500 win. I like that Alexander Rossi pick. He was the 2016 winner. He won as a rookie in the Indy 500,
Yes.
didn't he? Yes.
Yes.
So that would be a pretty dramatic storyline. But we are a NASCAR show, David. You know this. So we do have to focus in sort of tunnel vision now on Kyle Larson. We'll talk about the weather implications in a moment. But I guess first and foremost, I just want to ask, what have you seen from Kyle Larson so far during the month of May?
I've seen all that I wanted to and more. I mean, Kyle Larson, I won't say that it was like 100% he's going to get this right out of the box, but I think most people expected that he was going to get it. And the fact that he's not only gotten it, but in the Monday practice session, which, depending on weather, whatever happens on carb day, the Friday practice, the last practice, whether that gets rained out or not, the Monday practice session is really our last shot to see what the cars and drivers look like in race running.
Yeah.
And Kyle and the Arrow McLaren team had him up at the front of the pack, passing and racing with guys like Scott McLaughlin, Alexander Rossi, Scott Dixon. So that tells you the confidence level the team has in him. And he really shone in that situation. He was making passes. He even got McLaughlin around the outside at one point.
Wow.
So he's got this figured out to a certain extent. the subtleties of the race are going to be where Kyle Larson's going to have to do a lot of learning. It's going to be pit entry and pit exit.
Yeah.
With the track position race the way it is, it's so difficult in the 500 to get that right, because that can mean 2 or 3 positions in that big conga line of cars that we always see. The other question, of course, is going to be if something bad happens, if he gets a wing knocked off in the pits or in an accident, if he gets a speeding penalty in pit road, if he just gets shuffled back on a restart, how is his car going to react in traffic? I would say that's the only red flag I really saw from Kyle Larson in the practice session so far, is that the McLaren team hasn't really run him at the back of the train yet. And that's typically where it's really, really difficult to recover. Even the best drivers, like we saw Alex Palou last year, easily had the best car, got shuffled to the back in a pit lane incident, and never really got back all the way up to contend for the win, although he finished fourth.
Is there a reason maybe they hold him back? Like, how much harder is it to race in that kind of traffic? We talk about dirty air in NASCAR all the time. Dirty air exists in all major motorsports that go fast. Yeah, it makes sense they would want to get him some experience back there, but maybe are they just that worried about him crashing the primary? Do you think there's a reason they haven't had him make any laps in traffic?
Well, I think that's it, Eric. I mean, we've seen there's a couple of drivers in backup cars in this field, and they're at the back, right?
Yeah.
So it totally makes sense that you don't want to put him in a situation where you're going to take unnecessary risk. Totally makes sense. But you mentioned the dirty air and the traffic. If you talk to the drivers, and it's been this way for quite a few years, essentially since the Aeroscreen debuted in the Indianapolis 500, is that really the majority of the passing, the easy passes, I guess we'll put it that way, take place in the top 3 spots in the line. And once you get to fourth on back, it becomes astronomically more difficult to make passes and move up through the field, even if you have a tremendous car advantage over your competitors. It's a lot more like a restrictor plate race of old, when they used to run in the lines in the 90s, than it is kind of a more traditional open wheel style oval race. And so that's kind of going back to the Penske point, why everybody's a little bit apprehensive about Penske's ability to dominate this race, because they take up the first 3 spots on the grid. And if they get in line and they work together, they really could control this race entirely, both pace wise and, choose when the passes and where the passes happen.
That's a great point. That's very interesting. I do want to talk about weather now, because it's sort of the unfortunate elephant in the room. I know I'm like you. I'm so invested. I watch the Indy 500 every year, but I'm even more invested this year to see what Kyle Larson can do. And if there's, take us through the scenarios as you understand, David. If there's a delay, which there is a very decent chance the Indy 500 could at least get delayed, how does that impact Larson? How does that impact Aero McLaren? And if the race gets postponed to Monday, how do you think that would impact Larson's travel schedule?
Well, I can tell you that noon's not going to save us this year. There's a very big concern about Sunday, for sure. And so here's the scenarios, right? 4:15 is the cutoff point for Kyle Larson on Sunday when he has to leave for Charlotte to make the Coke 600. If he can get in the car before the race starts, he's good. But if he doesn't get in the car by 4:15, it's over. He has to go to Charlotte. Now, IndyCar rules have changed a little bit from the last time we really saw this factor in to play with the double, where rain threatened the 500. That was 2004 with Robbie Gordon. Robbie actually started the race. There was a very long rain delay. Robbie had to go to Charlotte. Another driver named Jacques Lazier jumped in the car and took it over and ran it to the finish. You can no longer have relief drivers in the Indianapolis 500. However, you can replace a driver before the race starts. So let's say the scenario on Sunday is this. It rains and the race starts at 4:30. Kyle Larson would have to leave, but his car can start the race with an alternate driver. It just has to start at the rear of the field. That alternate driver is team principal Tony Kanaan, who keeps claiming he's retired and yet always seems to come back. He might find another excuse this year. Now, my understanding is that Tony Kanaan is going to take a refresher test. You have to take a test to prove, it's weird, but it's a tradition at the Indy 500.
Sure.
You have to take a test to prove that you can still drive an IndyCar at 220 miles an hour. Tony is scheduled to take that on Thursday morning, And once he completes that, Tony Kanaan can start and finish the race in the 17 car. Now, if Sunday is a total washout, we're then looking at Charlotte. Is Charlotte able to complete or at least get a scheduled race distance in, right? Can you
Yeah.
get to halfway at Charlotte? If they do that, then Kyle Larson can run the Indy 500 Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, whenever it happens. But if Charlotte gets rained out too, then you're right back to the same scenario where we're looking at a 4:15 cutoff. I assume the 500 would probably start a little bit earlier, weather dependent, of course, maybe like 11 local time here just to try to get it in. But yeah, I think if you're Kyle Larson, you want it to totally wash out and then have Charlotte go at least to the end of the second stage and make that race official.
Yeah.
Then you don't have to worry about it. But there's a lot of very odd scenarios that could play out here, including the possibility that Kyle Larson might not even start the 500.
Yeah, man, that would be a huge disappointment, man. Weather just gets in the way of all good things, it seems. But like you said, I think if you're if you're a Kyle Larson fan or you're just invested in the double, you either want the Indy 500 to start and hopefully run on time, which, fingers crossed, it's still possible, or you want Sunday to be a total washout on the Indy side and push to Monday. I won't bring those bad vibes to you, although I don't know, man. Kyle Larson is a huge storyline. I did want to ask you about this. We talk all the time on the NASCAR side of things about how you can create superstars. I'm sure IndyCar talks about this some as well. Folks who aren't just stars in the racing world. Kyle Larson is a star in the racing bubble. Scott Dixon is a star in the racing bubble. But it's been a while, I feel, since American motorsports has had someone truly transcend the motorsports bubble. I looked at qualifying TV ratings for the Indy 500, and then I looked at North Wilkesboro All-Star TV ratings, both up significantly year over year the other night. Do you feel Kyle Larson has that opportunity to sort of be that transcendent American racing star that we've kind of sort of, at least in my opinion, been missing for a few years now?
I certainly think so. I think that pretty much everybody, like you said, within this bubble knows and respects Kyle Larson. The big hurdle that he's going to have to get over is that at some point a big sponsor that isn't HendrickCars.com is going to have to endorse him and put him in front of people, right? And we obviously know the situation why that's going to be difficult, but I don't think it's impossible. And I think Kyle Larson is the kind of driver that I think can sell a brand and get your brand seen by hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people on a regular basis. I think there's a lot of talk. I don't remember exactly who it was, but there's a lot of talk about how Kyle Larson's the greatest American race car driver and he's as good as Max Verstappen, right? It would be cool if we could get him in that global conversation for sure. And I think him running races like the Indianapolis 500. I mean, I even asked him at the media bullpen a couple of days ago, would you run Le Mans? And he not only said yes, but he said, I wouldn't want to do it in like Garage 56. I would want to race for the win.
Yeah, I heard that.
And that's the kind of stuff you want to hear from a driver who's going to be a transcendent star.
Yeah, he's not afraid to jump into race cars he's unfamiliar with. I remember when he went from sprint cars to dirt late models, and I don't know enough about that discipline to know how radical of a change that is, but he immediately started winning, and it was like, of course he did. That's Kyle Larson. But just a couple final questions here, David. I did want to ask you, Larson's an Indy 500 rookie. Mentioned Alexander Rossi won this race as a rookie. It's been a while. The last NASCAR driver to do the double was Kurt Busch 10 years ago. So I'm just trying to think, you know more Indy 500 than I do. What are some standout Indy 500 rookie performances, at least in recent years, that you can think of?
It's hard to define what a true rookie is too, right? I mean, Alexander Rossi for sure was a true rookie, but he didn't dominate the race. He won on a fuel mileage strategy. That's not to say that he's not worthy of that 500 win, by the way. He's been one of the best drivers year in, year out at the Indy 500. That was very much a deserved win. But, you think back to Fernando Alonso in 2017, say no more. He's not a rookie under any definition except for running the Indy 500. Even like Helio Castroneves in 2001 and Juan Montoya in his absolutely dominant Indy 500 win in 2000, they had been racing Indy cars in a different series for 3 years. They just hadn't been in the Indy 500. So you look back, and I would say really impressive rookie performances are ones like Ed Jones in 2017 finishing third. I think you look at Pato Ward in 2020 running up at the front of the field. I think he finished fourth or fifth in that race. Santino Ferrucci, I don't think he's ever finished outside the top 10 in the 500, and especially his rookie year, he drove through a gigantic pileup, finished in the top 10. I think he could almost go all the way back to Jacques Villeneuve in 1994, finishing second as a rookie and then winning the race the next year. It's difficult as a rookie, but it's not impossible to make your mark on the 500. And I would definitely put Kyle Larson more in the Juan Pablo Montoya, Fernando Alonso rookie bucket than I would put him in more of a Jacques Villeneuve, Alexander Rossi bucket, because he does, while not, he doesn't have Formula Car experience, he does have open wheel racing experience, and he has experience in NASCAR Cup Series racing where you run over 200 miles an hour, on a fairly regular basis. So if we're talking about rookies that have impressed me that aren't Kyle Larson, I would give you a couple of names. I think Linus Lundqvist. I think a lot of people saw his crash early in the week, but he's in a Ganassi car. He's strong. I think he will eventually figure it out and get through the field. And in particular, if you're a NASCAR fan, there's a driver who's rattling some cages out there, and I think you might want to latch on to Christian Rasmussen. He's done a very good job of making Colton Herta very upset at him, which is probably good. We need a little bit of hate. So he's a driver starting, I think, in row 8 or 9. And if you're looking for a rookie to latch onto, I think maybe you guys would look at the 33 car.
Awesome. Well, David, I do really appreciate your time. Before I let you go, I don't know if you've made your official win pick or anything. I'm not going to ask you to necessarily spoil that here if you don't want to, but
sure.
My final question is, who do you think is the favorite to win? Who are you most closely watching to win the Indy 500? And kind of in the same vein, what is a reasonable expectation for Kyle Larson in his first 500?
So the favorites are the 3 cars in the front row. There's no doubt about it. I would be surprised if it's not one of those 3. Now, would it be a pleasant surprise? Absolutely. There are a ton of drivers that can do that in the front to mid pack, right? I talked about Colton Herta. We talked about Colton Herta. Alex Palou, Elio Castro Neves always finds a way up there. Takuma Sato, Ryan Hunter-Reay driving for an Indy only team is in the Fast 12. There's so many guys who can challenge that we're maybe overlooking because some of the bigger storylines. So, it's hard to know until race day, but there's usually about 5 or 6 guys who really kind of rise to the top. A reasonable expectation for Kyle Larson, I think, is the top 10 finish. I think you've got to look at the Kurt Busch metric, right? Yeah. 6th place. I think that's where he should aim. If you're Kyle Larson, for sure you want to win the race, but he's got a 2-year contract. He's coming back next year. It's not desperation time. You don't have to put that pressure on yourself if you're Kyle Larson to go out and win it right now. Use the 500 miles. Use all of that experience in your team and on your pit box to learn the race, understand it. If you're in a position to win it, go win the damn thing. But if you're not, don't crash doing it. Finish the race, take all of that learning experience and bring it into 2025. And then our reasonable expectation for Kyle Larson is going to be a race win. But top 10 for sure for that 17 car.
Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of fans, I think, forget that this is a 2-year commitment. So it's not all or nothing, like you said. It's going to be fun to watch regardless. Sunday, Monday, I'm just excited to see.
Tuesday, Wednesday.
Yeah, I'm just excited to see 500 miles at Indianapolis. It's the greatest weekend in racing. David Land, thank you so much for spending some time with us. Folks can find your work on YouTube. You've been extremely busy the past couple of weeks. You've got a Patreon. You've got you follow you on Twitter as well. All your social media handles are down in the description below. David, have a wonderful weekend out there. Hope you get a great race in.
Thank you so much, Eric. Appreciate you having me on.
Huge thank you to David for taking some time out of his busy schedule to talk with us here on Out of the Groove. You can hear even more from David tonight on NWP, live at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on the Icebergs YouTube channel. So be sure to check it out. Hope to see you all there. Thanks for watching this episode, folks. I will catch you again very, very soon. Fingers crossed the weather plays in our favor this weekend at Indy and Charlotte.